in a major hit to asylum seekers in UK, which could set a precedent for migrant policies across the world. Rishi Sunak's Rwanda Deportation Bill is set to become a law after opposition and cross-bench peers backed down on Monday night, paving the way for legal battles over the potential removal of dozens of people seeking asylum. After a marathon battle of ping-pong over the key legislation between the Commons and the Lords, the bill finally passed when opposition and cross-bench peers gave way on Monday night. For the first time, UK PM Rishi Sunak set out the extensive preparations that have already been made to get the first planes in the air within 10 to 12 weeks, in what he said was one of the most complex operational endeavours the UK Home Office has carried out. The bill is expected to be granted royal assent on Tuesday and will cost £1.8 million for each of the first 300 deportees, the National Audit Office has confirmed. Meanwhile, yet another incident has taken place where 5 people have died in an attempt to cross the channel in a small boat from France. 3 men, women and a child reported dead on the vessel said to have been carrying more than 110 people. My colleague Vishal brings us all the details in this report.
But we are ready. Plans are in place. And these flights will go come what may. No foreign court will stop us from getting flights off. Rwanda is ready too. And I'd like to thank the government of Rwanda for their work in strengthening their asylum system, passing legislation and setting up a new appeals tribunal.
The UK government intends to send some asylum seekers to Rwanda, which is a small East African nation. It has laid out plans in the Rwanda bill, which is now set to become a law. Let's take a look at what this bill actually is. The bill says that anyone entering the UK illegally after January 1, 2022 could be sent to Rwanda. Asylum seekers will have their claims processed in the African nations. If successful, they could be granted refugee status and allowed to stay in Rwanda. If not, they could apply to settle in Rwanda on other grounds or seek asylum in another safe country. Under this policy, no asylum seeker would be able to apply to return to the UK. Ministers have said that the plan would deter people from arriving in the UK on small boats. Now let's examine whether this is a major political win for UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak. Well, that doesn't seem to be the case. The bill barely affects the UK's net migration figures. In 2022, about 46,000 people arrived in the UK on small boats. Meanwhile, net migration in the same year was 7,45,000. On the other hand, the plan has already cost £220 million. Reports suggest that the figure could rise to £600 million when the first 300 people are sent to Rwanda. The plan could leave Sunak open to criticism as it could be branded expensive and ineffective.
To discuss this and more, we have with us Nicholas Nugent, British journalist and former BBC editor, London, joining us from Somerset, England. So, sir, my first question to you is, Sunak has been facing a lot of backlash from the UN as well as other rights bodies. So do you see this law setting a precedent for other countries across the globe and how they deal with illegal migrants?
Well, in a way, it's not Britain that's setting the precedent, but it was Australia, because it's an Australian model that Britain has copied, in a nutshell, offshore processing of asylum seekers. The difference is that in the British case, they will not be granted the right of asylum in Britain. So that's, you could say, taking it one stage further. The applications for asylum by those who have been transported to Rwanda will be to the Rwanda courts. And if they're granted asylum, it will be in Rwanda or possibly in another country, but not Britain. So Britain is washing its hands off the problem of illegal immigration, you could say. And they're hoping that by this measure, they will stop the boats coming, because quite apparently, Britain has lost control of its borders. We left the European Union claiming we were going to tighten control of our borders, but we've lost control of our borders. All these little boats coming across the English Channel from France, bringing, as your correspondent said, 45,000 people last year illegally to Britain. Britain is bound by the Refugee Convention to grant them asylum if they meet certain eligibility qualifications. But the Sunak government is saying, no, we don't want that anymore. It's a big problem for us. So we're going to export the problem and export the process of applying asylum to Rwanda. And in doing so, they hope they will stop the small boats coming. It worked in Australia. Will it work in Britain? It's a big question mark. It's a very, very controversial move, as you can see, because it appears to be renouncing our humanitarianism to offshoring the business of deciding who has a legitimate claim to asylum and who doesn't.
So talking about this bill, it was finally is set to become a law after a lot of back and forth in the British Parliament. And many are seeing this as a political win for the Rishi Sunak administration. So how do you think this will impact the Conservative Party's chances in the upcoming polls?
Well, I doubt it'll affect them very much because they're quite minimal already. The Conservative government in the opinion polls is way, way down by comparison with its main rival, the Labour Party. It's possible that they'll pick up some votes because of having finally dealt with this problem. But I think a lot depends on how successful the measure is. In other words, do the small boats stop coming? Because as you're reporting in the news today, or at least I saw on screen, boats have been coming over the English Channel this very day, and 5 people lost their lives in doing so. So, we have a big problem of illegal immigration. But beyond that, the government has a big problem of how to solve it and cure it. Now, it is perfectly possible that if in the next 2 or 3 months we see a reduction in the number of small boats, possibly even an ending of the small boats coming, then the Conservatives will pick up a bit of electoral benefit from that. But they're a long, long way behind, so it's not going to determine whether they form the next government. Let's put it like that. It's highly politicized, but it would take an enormous success to turn around the fortunes of the Conservative Party at this stage.
I'd just like to ask you one last quick question. This bill is initially expected to cost the UK government about £1.8 million for the first 300 deportees. So what are some of the public attitudes towards this bill, given the fact that UK has also been suffering from high inflation?
Well, I don't think that's the main point. I mean, yes, a lot of people will criticize the money they're spending and indeed the time they've spent trying to get this measure through, having to introduce a special measure into Parliament because the High Court or the Supreme Court rejected their earlier efforts to do so. So there can be a lot of criticism about the process itself. As for the finance, well, you can weigh the cost of moving illegal immigrants to Rwanda against the cost of sustaining them in Britain while their asylum applications are considered. So I don't think that's the key point, though it is a factor. You're quite right, the cost that this whole process is taking. I think the rigmarole, the amount of parliamentary time and such forth, these are much bigger factors.
Right. Well, Mr. Nugent, thank you so much for joining us.